Okay. We are talking today about negotiating rent relief, and that is critical here. And what I want to do today is, excuse me, I'm going to make sure my video is off. Let's stop my video, share my screen. Pardon me. All right. Thanks for attending. We're going to talk about how we approach negotiating documenting rent relief. And what we hope to accomplish is to give you a sense of the things that you need to think about, and then the things that you need to ask for as part of your request for rent relief. And this is a pretty intense situation. We're talking to a lot of people who are really struggling with, their businesses being closed, severely down. And I'm hoping that we can give you a sense of calm and direction to try to get through this and a way to think about it. And of course, if you end up needing help, well then, hopefully we can help. All right. This is me with a shorter haircut like the rest of us. And I am someone who has done a lot of work in this area. And in good times, I have done hundreds and hundreds of leases. I've read them, I've negotiated them, I've drafted them. And in downturns, I have renegotiated or obtained forbearance or relief with respect to many, many leases. We've done this a lot of times for a lot of different people with a lot of different landlords of all sizes. So we've got a little bit of context to provide you, and that's what we're going to do today. All right. Don't make this mistake at the outset, and if you have made this mistake, we're going to help you fix it. Lease is so important in terms of thinking about how to come back, and it's easy to fall into the trap of just panicking, calling your landlord and saying, "I've got coronavirus, we're down, we're closed, I need rent relief," and then just take whatever they say and write the check and move on to worrying about the next thing. I'd like you to avoid doing that. And I will tell you that some folks aren't even calling their landlord. They're simply sending reduced checks or no checks. And that's a mistake for a couple reasons. And we're going to get into why that is. And what we're going to do is we're going to give you, later in this, we're going to give you forms for your request and forms for documenting this. All right. Slow down. Think about what you need. How much can you actually afford? And what does the unit that's in question, the lease in question, need? How much can that particular unit afford to pay in rent? And if you're a multi-unit operator, step back and think about the business overall, because you may have a healthy unit that's contributing, and maybe if you look at just the unit, rent relief isn't justified for that particular store, but across your business, you need rent relief, and that is something you can use to make your business healthy and contribute. And so don't eliminate asking for rent relief just because the unit in question is doing well. And for some of you larger operators out there, is there a strategic closure? The landlords are like everyone else. They're strapped for cash. If you're a big operator, you've got a little extra cash, you're getting rent relief in other places, and you've got something you want to strategically close, maybe this is the time to throw a little bit of money at a landlord to get them to agree to close it. I mean, they might take it, and they might take an amount that you think is surprisingly low. You just don't know. All right. You're going to distinguish yourself by making a plan. You're going to make projections, and you're going to set yourself apart by having that plan. And I want to give you a pass here when you make these projections. I know that as you make projections, your projections are uncertain anyway, right? Like, it's just hard to do, but it's impossible to do right now, basically. You got to do it anyway. And have the confidence, or at least the calmness, to know that everybody's projections are wrong and yours are going to be off. And don't be afraid to have them be off and to be wrong and to come back later and just have to correct them and adjust, because that's all we can do to get through this is continue to adjust. It is key that you communicate with your landlords, and picking up the phone is just so important. And it's really, it's critical. Your landlords are people, and they've got their fears, they've got the way they think things should be done, and they're curious about what's going on with you. You are their business, and they want to know what's going on. Be a resource to them. I actually represent several landlords and had the experience of representing someone who was on the receiving end of just a unilateral statement, I'm going to change the rent, without having a back and forth. And in each case, my client, the landlord, would have granted some kind of relief. It would have looked a little different than what the tenant in question was insisting on, but it would have been, relatively the same. The difference is that relationship is damaged, and don't do that. Don't lose sight of the fact that your landlord is a stakeholder and is someone hopefully that you're going to have a long relationship with, and treat them that way. Call them up and talk through this all. Ask for what you need. And I cannot overstate the importance of this. And it's easy to overlook, but you need to ask not for what you think the landlord will give you, but for what you actually need. Because your first request, that's as much as you're ever going to get. It's not going to get better than that. If what you need from the landlord to keep your particular store, restaurant, whatever it is, operational and healthy, is defined by the economics of that unit, then talk about that with the landlord, figure that out, and ask for that. If what you need from the landlord is part of the plan across all your units to keep the business healthy, then ask for that. And we're going to get into this later in a forum, but that's just crucial. Spelling out deferment, spelling out repayment terms, making sure that everything is all spelled out. Don't stop thinking strategically. Each time you assess a lease, figure out, okay, what's coming? Assume we get through this, assume I'm back in business. Have I got an upgrade coming for which I want the landlord to contribute? Am I going to try to close the unit early anyway because it wasn't doing that well, and now this is even worse? The landlord is your landlords are different by context. You're going to want to deal with the landlord. If you got a 20-year lease on a rockstar location, that is a different kind of partner than a landlord on a lease that's got a year and a half left. You're going to close it at the end of the lease. And you need to adjust the tenor of what you're asking, how you're approaching the landlord and what you're asking for accordingly. You might push a little harder with someone that you don't need quite as much. You might go a little softer with someone who is going to be important in the future, assuming that we're all coming back. If your upcoming request, if you're going to want to do something the landlord thinks is exciting, like improve the property or, ask for more years, and the landlord is interested in that, bring that up. Say, look, when we get through this, we're going to talk about that. Engage them. One of the things we're seeing is that we make these requests, and oftentimes they're small, where we say, hey, we want to get a few months rent relief, abatement or deferment. And what we get back is kind of disproportionate responses from landlords that ask us to waive this concept of impossibility of performance or force majeure. And while those things probably don't apply based on what we're seeing, it's leverage and it's a discussion point, and it's something you don't want to give up yet. You don't want to give it up yet because it's too soon. We don't know how long this is going to go, if it's going to come back, what it means to your particular business. Are you going to have to operate, partially for a while? We've also seen people asking for things like, well, give up an option, and we'll give you a few months rent relief. It's not worth it. And consider saying something like, hey, we haven't considered any of what you're asking for. If your plans are, you're asking us to give up an option, and we haven't considered those plans, and we don't want to do that right now. We don't spend the money on it. So we're just asking for 3 months abatement or deferral or 50% deferral, and it's just a short-term request. If your landlord presses, I've got to have these things in exchange for it, it really does. It's just a gut check. I mean, how badly do you need the relief? And are you better off if you just can't come to agreement and you don't have the money, you're not willing to give these things up? Are you better off just unilaterally sending less rent? And that's one where I'm gonna ask you to get an attorney involved, because it's just better off. Strategically, when we look at these things, we always take as much of a look at the landlord themselves as we can. Is it a REIT? So it's a large bureaucracy? They're going to have to ask a lot of people to do things with us. We temper our expectations in terms of lead times and what we think we can get back. Did the landlord just buy this thing with a 1031? They've got a big mortgage. Sometimes when we're doing this, we'll pull title on a property and actually look at the deed of trust, which might have the terms in it of the note, and we might be able to figure out just how much that landlord owes. And if we figure out that they're going to need our help, if we ask for less rent, they're going to have to pay less in mortgage. And in order to justify that, they're going to need help from us in terms of providing information. And so, often we'll offer to help them. Look, we need this relief, and we know you're going to in turn going to need relief. So let's work together with your bank to try to get this to work. Other questions, is the landlord a retired couple, or, we're living on the rent? Do they have a lot of properties? That makes it easier. Is your landlord just a jerk? That makes it harder. And just, if you have professionals working with you and you know these facts, bring them in on the facts. It helps them when they're talking to them to know what that landlord's context is. All right, don't get too fired up about this slide. We are going to go over a couple examples of this a little later on. Some forms that you can have just to use yourself if you want. So it's critical that we get something in writing. And we want something in writing so that nobody can later claim that there was a misunderstanding and that you're actually in default now, or that you owe more money back, or you owe it back quicker than we agreed. And if you really want to get mundane about it, if you're a larger operator and you're getting an audit, you want something that shows you had the right to pay less rent. You want to put it in the file with the lease so that when the auditor is comparing the rents paid with the leases, they can see you had the right to pay less rent. And it'll take what could be a 30-minute witch hunt for backup to say that you were justified, and turn it into just a 10-second glance where they look at the piece of paper or the stored PDF and say, oh, okay, they had the right to pay less, and that's what they did. It's easy to look past some of these things when you are negotiating. And I want to kind of go over these things, and then I'm going to show you where they are in the form that we're going to give you. Obviously, you want to detail what's being abated or postponed or deferred. But some of the other things you want to get clear are you paying additional rent or triple nets or insurance and anything else you're paying? And if you are going to pay those things, get credit for that and write it down. And if you're not going to pay those things, then make that clear. And if what you need is, what you need is, you want your default rent, your late fees, and any other defaults arising from the fact that the business is closed or the rent is late. You want that all waived so that when we come back, Or if we have to negotiate later, we don't have to negotiate those things away. I don't want the landlord to have a set of things that they get to say, well, I'll grant you this concession where I waive this, and I'll grant you this concession, but now I need this from you. Try to level the playing field upon return as much as possible. If your rent is postponed or deferred, your agreement should lay out manageable repayment terms. I understand with the lack of predictability, you might be agreeing to a repayment schedule that you're just not sure about, because if this continues, obviously you're going to need more help and you're not going to be able to pay it back. You're better off getting it written down, having it in writing, and if you got to change it, go back and change it. Part of the exercise here with having rents and having these communications with the landlord is we are developing new communication pathways and new muscles, right? We are practicing how to ask for this in case we have to do it again. And once you have all of your landlord's communication information, emails, addresses, home addresses, and try to get as much as that together. Once you have all that together, it's going to be easy enough to go back and do it again. And if we're in the same storm, that conversation just isn't going to be that difficult. All right. Here are these forms, and we're also going to share the email that we use, in sort of a covered annotated email. These are two forms that we've given people just to use, and in the brackets are on the one on the right of your screen is the postponement or deferral agreement. You choose the things in the brackets, right? And then you delete the others. This agreement is simple, and you're going to need to, it's not necessarily plug and play. You need to look at it, and you need to change it for the ways in which it affects you. We try to make it as general as possible. And so we've got this paragraph in here. We just agree that all late fees, default charges, interest, and any other fees, And we've designed this so that it's enforceable. And of course, we could lawyer up and start going through the lease and referencing every provision by paragraph. Our concern in doing that is the more legalistic this looks, the more likely it is that the landlord's going to get their attorney involved. And if their attorney is sitting home without much to do, this will be an opportunity to make some fees that we don't want to, we want to avoid. We want to make this simple, understandable, and enforceable. And that's kind of where we are. The abatement agreement, pretty simple. You want to make sure you get all of the information up top, the lease agreement, the property address, the date that you're doing this. And then over on the other side, we've got the postponement agreement. And you're going to want to lay that out as specifically as possible in that. It would be helpful if you can actually add the amount of rent to this. So up there in the blanks, say the months of April, May, June, July, in the amounts of shall be postponed. And then down below, we're trying to get some brackets around how this is going to get paid back. If you just can't agree, we're saying, okay, it's 90 days from when we reopen. Ideally, maybe it's divided over 12 equal payments starting when you come back, or maybe it's a lump sum at the end of the lease, but just trying to nail something down where it is clear what is actually going to happen, rather than have you come back and have the landlord say, okay, I'm ready to get my rent now. You're going to have startup costs as you reopen this thing. You're going to have to order, if you're a restaurant, you're going to have to get new food. People are going to come back. It's going to be, as near as I can tell, it is going to be a slow build. And I think planning for that by not having a huge rent obligation due immediately is pretty key. Here's an email we use, and again, if you click on the form link at the bottom of this page, you will also get a Word document with this sample email request, and it goes for 2 slides here. So we do this in the body of the email, not in a letter. We think that's more effective because you don't have to open another thing. We just want you to open the email and take a look and see what it is. And some landlords think of their store, that's the Taco Bell store, that's the Burger King store. So you want the brand in there. They might not even know who you are. Put the address in there because nobody can mistake the address. And then for your purposes, put the store number so you can find this whole string of emails later. Because if you're doing a bunch of these, it's really useful to be able to just pull up the entire conversation by searching by store number. And here's a little nuance where we tell them we're asking for rent relief, and we tell them that our business is, and then we choose, whether it's down some percent or closed. And when you say business, if you've got multiple units, that allows you to pivot later into talking about the unit. If the unit's bad, or if the unit's strong but the business is bad, you can pivot into talking about your overall business and how that's down. Let's go to the second page of this thing. Here's where we spell out the specific dollar amounts and where you put the terms in so that it's all laid out. And you want to make it, like I said, you want to make it simple. Hey, just scan it back. You can't scan, we'll send you a DocuSign. If you don't have DocuSign, it's worth it to get it. It's pretty simple. Even I can use it. It's like falling off a log. All right. I know folks aren't going to love this, but I want you to think like a lawyer. Maybe play it like it's a game. Don't offer financials unless you get asked for them. You just don't need to go all out and be volunteering a bunch of stuff. If they ask for economic information, start with top line revenue. That's typically going to tell enough of a story that you probably don't need to go past that. And then the rest of the slide somewhat speaks for itself. If the store that you're talking about, if you got a Taco Bell and it's down 20%, go with that, show that. If you've got a blended business, let's say you're a Yum Brands franchisee and you've got Taco Bell and you've got KFC. KFC is actually up right now. People are running in there and getting comfort food. So across that system, they're seeing that their business is up. Visits are down, but ticket average is higher. So it's kind of interesting. But maybe you've got Taco Bells and KFCs. Your KFCs are up, Taco Bells are down, or maybe you've got some other concept that's down quite a bit. And you need to balance it out, right? You need to balance out your cash flow across the business. Well, then it's not going to help to talk about the KFC, which is up. You got to talk about the business, which is down overall, and you need the cash flow. If the whole thing looks good and you still want to ask, you got a little bit higher hill to climb, but stress that you're reserving cash for the uncertainty. And maybe what you do is you push for a deferral instead of an abatement, and you just say, look, I'm just going to hold some cash and try to get through this. I'll pay you back quickly. The lease over the same period is the same to you. And what, I should have mentioned this earlier. It is one of the differences when you're dealing with a landlord. If you're dealing with the retired couple, what matters is that they're paying the bills with the money that you're sending them every month. And so you got to think about that. If you're dealing with an investor, what matters to them is return on investment over the life of the lease. And so if you move the rents around, but it's the same money over whatever term you're in, that's less of an ask to them, so long as they're above their debt service. And so just understanding what pain you are or are not asking someone to undergo makes sense. I should have mentioned that at the earlier slide. It is important. All right. A lot of landlords are asking, hey, where's your PPP money? And go ahead, tell them you applied. If you have your money, tell them that. Those PPP loans are, it's 2.5 times payroll. It's supposed to cover payroll. And if you want it forgiven, you've only got 25% of the loan to spend on rent. It's probably not going to cover it. I have found that landlords are generally educated on this point and understand it and aren't pushing too hard. But occasionally I get someone who just, you get the PPP money, I want to get paid. And that's tricky, and you got to stick handle that. If you can convince the landlord that, look, I just don't want to just shoot the entire load on paying out rent. Rather, let's talk about a deferment. We'll get it back to you. I want to make sure I've got payroll covered. I've got some percentage of this that I can use, but I want to get it forgiven so I'm not carrying a higher debt burden when I come out of this. I understand the money's cheap, but right now, maybe use your bank here, and you say, look, I've got permission to borrow the PPP money, but the understanding is that it's going to get forgiven, and my bank's not going to love it when I still have debt at the end of this, or I didn't somehow manage to get this forgiven, or maybe I've got too much debt and my covenant, my loan covenants are going to be in default. Go ahead and play the bank off your landlord in that way. And I think I forgot to mention it in an earlier slide, but in terms of your bank and your franchisor, one thing that one sort of crossroads that you might get to is, if you've got concessions from your bank or your franchisor, do you share that with your landlord? Will that make them less likely or more likely to give you rent relief? It's a little counterintuitive. It's going to make them more likely, just on average. People don't like to go first, and people don't like to be alone. They like to be part of a crowd. Generally, your landlords are smaller than your franchisor or your bank. And if a large institution like your franchisor or your bank has already signed off on the fact that you need relief of some form, your landlord's going to be more comfortable joining that group and saying, okay, everybody else is doing it, I'll do it too. There's a sense of fairness that plays out there too that actually works. And you'd think it'd be the opposite, but I have found over 20 years of doing this that it isn't. People like to think that it's fair, think that everybody's participating, and they like to basically verify their own decisions by looking at those of others. All right. Don't forget about your development agreement. If your franchisor is willing to push out timelines, go ahead and push them out and get it in writing, get it written down. The person you're dealing with might not be at the franchisor, might not have any recollection of telling you that was okay. If you're going to do a closure and you're under a development agreement, and a lot of them, what we're seeing now is that your development agreement has a net gain where you're supposed to build 10 stores. But if you close a store while you're supposed to build 10, now you got to replace that store. You don't just build 10 stores. At the end of the development period, you have to have 10 more stores than you did when it started. This is the time to ask for that closure to be exempted or accepted from that requirement. In the middle of a disaster, everybody's going to be more flexible. And when this all ebbs away, people are going to return to digging in, dotting I's, crossing T's. Get what you can while you can. It can be a little bit of a squeaky wheel, but go ahead and do it. If you were on our previous webinar, we talked about this a little bit, and I'll mention it here. This is an example of a force majeure clause that that's from a lease that we drafted. And you can see right here what the problem is that you're entitled to be closed because of restrictive governmental laws or regulations, but it doesn't excuse you from payment of rent. And I think conceptually, most people thought that where that would come up is business interruption insurance. There's a separate line of thinking I'm seeing evolve where people are arguing that, well, maybe this is a condemnation It's a government seizure of your business. I haven't looked that deeply into that argument. Offhand, I don't think it flies. But if you are up against the wall and you need something to say back, there are those out, and call us up, call somebody, talk to them about the law. But this is the situation most people are finding themselves in. The business interruption insurance is getting talked about a lot, and I think the consensus in the legal community is go ahead, make the claim, get the rejection, read the thing carefully. You might have an argument that it applies to you, and it is going to get litigated. Not almost certainly. I almost said it's almost certainly. It is going to get litigated, and so you might as well get your rejection, and to the extent there's a payout later, some settlement. At that point, it would be, if you're entitled to it, then you'll get your full BI payout, but it's going to take a while. And it might be that they just make payments on a sort of class basis, and you just might end up with free money in exchange for your rejection. So I think get the rejection, and also the rejection helps as part of the conversation with your landlord. Yes, I applied for my business interruption insurance, and I didn't get any. So that's where we are. I don't have BI insurance to pay you, and that's that's all I have to say about that. All right, we're going to try to. I'm going to bring up the Q&A here. Bear with me while I navigate that. Yeah, opening Q. All right. David Dolati, I'm going to unmute you. Hang on. Are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you. It's there. It took me, I had to ding on the thing a bunch of times to get you up there, but go ahead. What's your question?
Well, I was told that that the insurance company can raise premium after a rejection like this. That was my concern with filing for business interruption insurance.
Can you say that again? You warbled just a little bit. What's the question?
Well, I typed it in the Q&A, but can business insurance, can they raise your premium just for asking?
That is a new one on me. I have not heard that. I talked to your agent. Is my suggestion. I got to tell you, I got to punt on that one. I've never heard anybody doing that. And I'm sorry, I'm completely not answering your question, but I just don't know the answer. I've never heard of that happening, nor should it. But I can't tell you if I think if that's illegal. And I'm sorry, that concludes your question. Do you have any follow-up, or I can go on to somebody else who's got their hand raised?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, sure. David Stiles. Hang on, I'm going to unmute you. It's Zoom's on a lag here with unmuting you. David is, David, are you still Trinity? Once you come in to unmute here, you can answer that. There you are.
Oh, hey, Nate.
How are you?
We're officially Trinity Capital Division of Citizens Capital Markets.
Okay, that's how you say it now. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. Good presentation. Not to be self-serving, but the question was, what's your thoughts on getting professionals involved to help folks along in this effort versus going it alone?
Thank you for that, David. And when we wind up, I put the last slide up and say, thanks. First of all, from my standpoint, if you're listening and you've got questions and you think you have, this is overwhelming, please call us. We'll give you a free consultation. And I'll be honest with you, David's on the phone. David's firm, Trinity, has done this. I mean, David, I did this with Trinity 15 years ago when we were talking with Taco Bell franchisees. So having a good professional to help you think through this, to help you react to these things, someone who's done it before. I mean, if you look at the size of what it is that you're asking for, talk to the professionals about how much they think it's going to cost you to have them help you. You should get a substantial return on investment from what your professional is providing. In other words, the amount that it costs you to have a professional help you through this should be less than what you're going to get in terms of rent relief. And from a stress standpoint, from a management standpoint, and from an insight standpoint, we've set you up here today with some things that can help you do this on your own. But hiring a good professional, whether it's a law firm like ours, and we can do this for you, or whether it's an investment banking firm like David's, getting quotes, asking what it's going to cost and what the expectations are is a smart way to go. And I think it's a great question, David. Any other Q&A? I'm looking at the open session here. We've got a great, this is a great comment from Sonny Guy. Hey, Sonny, how you doing? Sonny says he's got lots of success telling landlords that if they feel there's a great market for their property and will backfill, that means they replace them with somebody else. They're going to lose the drive-through, and they're going to need to pay a bunch of leasing commission and a lot of TI money to get somebody back in there. And you know, if you're up and down the West Coast, that is a great point. If that business closes and somebody else takes over, that landlord has a serious consideration that they are going to lose the drive-through on that thing, because those things are grandfathered in a lot of communities. And you know, a quick serve restaurant is going to do anywhere from 70 to 80% of its business out the drive-through window. The value in that property is absolutely going to go away if they lose that drive-through. Sonny, that's just a great point. Thank you. Anyone else? I'll leave it open for a few more minutes. And here's that form link again, if you'd like it. You get those forms. If you've got any questions about those forms, give us a call. And if you want to consult about any of the issues that we've raised today, whether it's we can help you ourselves or steer you to someone else who can, there are a lot of good professionals who've got a lot of experience doing this. And if I don't have any other questions, I'm going to end the meeting and wish you all a good rest of your week and the best of luck. Oh, we got a question here. One more question from David. Hang on, let me unmute you, David. Oh, I've got a couple more questions here. Hang on, we'll stick around and answer questions.
Can you hear me, Nate?
I can, thank you. This is there, that worked much better.
I'm a Supercuts franchisee. In our case, the franchisor actually signs the lease and we sublease in a lot of instances. So we're kind of stuck. We're stuck between what the franchisor is advising versus what the landlord wants. And I'm not sure how to navigate that. And I'm not sure you have an answer to that.
My answer is no fun. It's a case-by-case basis. And when we've encountered this working with Supercuts folks, or another one where this happens a lot is Subway, or another one is Jack in the Box, the only answer I've got for you is to you got to do the work, you got to dig, you got to have the conversations. If it's not working, you got to be the squeaky wheel. And it's not fun because they want you to go away. Hey, we rolled out our program. Would you stop asking? Say, well, look, yeah, that works on 10 of my units, but I've got 3 over here that I'm down far below system average for reasons beyond my control. I need more help than what you're offering. And if sometimes we've had to end around, go to the landlord and say, look, we're going to close. And you put yourself between the franchisor and the landlord. That's tricky. And I would not do that without help. I would not do that without some kind of investment banking firm or law firm advising you on the delicate situation that is getting in between the franchisor and the landlord. Does that
No, but
that make sense? I mean,
can you hear
go
me?
ahead.
The franchisor is not forcing us to do anything, nor have they created a program, at least to this point. It's just, they're just telling us things that may or down the road may or may not be in our example. Don't pay April, which we did not, but in the end, the landlord's going to come after my business if there's not something negotiated. Does that make sense? I'm not saying the franchisor's making us do anything, but they're advising us to do things that you wonder how they're going to play out.
That's a great question, and it's a lot of what I was talking about before, which is about not coming back with a lot of uncertainty. And so if I were advising you, I would be trying to allay those concerns by getting contact information on the landlord, picking up the phone and trying to see what the thinking is there and what's going on. And it's this tricky business where the landlord's got both of you on the hook, and it looks pretty good to them because hey, if you can't pay, I'm going to chase these guys. And you just got to get on the phone with the landlord and figure out what that landlord's thinking and where they're at with it. And there's not a magic bullet there. That is a tricky position to be in, and I really sympathize with that. Is it any follow up on that? Because unfortunately that's about all I got for you, which isn't great, but you just gotta work the phones.
I understand. I'm confident the franchisor is trying to do what's in our best interest. I just, sometimes you feel like you're between two parties.
Yeah, I can understand that. And if they're not, but if they're not communicating and you don't know what's going on, it's fair for you to find out what it is. What the thinking is, what the landlord's thinking. All right, I'm going to pivot over here, and I've got a couple other hands up. Pradeep's got his hand up and has had for a while. David, I'm going to mute you and move to someone else unless you got more question.
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, hey, thank you. Pradeep, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Absolutely. I see there's a B in your name. I think I'm mispronouncing it. How do you say that?
Prabdeep.
Prabdeep. I'm sorry. I
No worries.
You went right with the H. Go
No
ahead.
worries. Thank you for doing this, Nate. I think I attended one of your earlier sessions on this, and I kind of followed quite a lot of the stuff you went over and communicated that way with my landlords. But it seems like they're not. I have 3, and none of them are budging. And they're basically, everybody's. It seems like they're trying to wait and see where this is going. They're not pushing defaults on us right now, but they're just saying let's just wait and go. So is it something? I mean, we are still in limbo. I've tried all of these things, and this is where we've left. Let's see where things go. So not sure what would be the next step, or which direction we could move, but everybody's just, all the discussions have kind of halted for now. Yeah.
What I would say here is that, I'm going to answer your question a little bit, but I'm going to encourage you to just contact me offline, and I'm happy to talk to you for probably 10 or 15 minutes about what exactly is going on.
Certainly.
Because you're standing at this point where if you're forcing them to accept less rent by simply sending less rent, Or if you're putting yourself in a position where you're running out of cash because you're just paying full rent even though you can't afford to, somebody needs to just help you think through and talk through the consequences of both of those avenues. And so I would be happy to talk to you for a little bit about kind of what, door number one, door number two, and what your best option is. If you can't pay and they won't agree, you end up in a situation where you have to pay them less and hope that you'll figure it out later. And I don't love that, but reality is reality, and
Right.
you just got to deal with it. So you got my information on the screen right in front of you. Go ahead and flip me an email, and if that's all right, we'll just talk for a few minutes offline if that's okay.
Certainly, that'll be great. Thank you so much.
All right. I'm going to mute you and then scroll down these questions. And then I don't know if David's hand, either David Delati or Styles' hand is still up, but I'm just going to run down the Q&A here. Will I make the PowerPoint available? Absolutely. It'll be on the website at some point. But if you want to email me, Karen, at the email below, I'll just email it back to you. That's fine. We can do that. And I've got another question. Reiterate your suggestions on rent negotiating if you are considering closing the store before the end of the year. Yeah, I'd try to buy out that lease. I'd try to go back to them and say, look, I've got this many months left. What's the point? Let's try to settle up. And I would sit down with a lawyer actually on that one and figure out if you just stop paying, what are the potential consequences of that? If you have more stores, is that going to create a default across your other leases? It's going to create a default in other areas. And so you do need to think that one through. But I think if you know you're closing it now, your overall objective is to try to limit your cash outlay now. And I think you might be in a good situation to strike some kind of a deal with the landlord where kind of their options are, well, I'm just going to close and you can chase me, or we can work something out right now and do it on an orderly basis. And I think you have an opportunity, frankly. And if you want to explore that further, go ahead and email me offline, and I'm happy to kick that around with you more if that doesn't do it. Gary asks, what is my sense of whether or not landlords have rental insurance? I don't know. The ones that I represent don't, and the ones that I'm talking to aren't offering. I don't know the answer to that, actually. I think my guess is, and it's just my guess, not very many. And if they do, it's probably like BI insurance, where basically the insurance company is saying that, well, look, that's not something we're going to pay out on. And if it had, and we would never insure for that, because if we had to pay out on insurance across the entire country or across the entire world, depending how big their business is, on all of these claims, we don't have the cash. We'll just go broke. So I would expect that landlords are, even if they arguably have rental insurance that applies, it's going to be a long time before they get paid. All right, David, I'm going to unmute you, and if you still have your hand up, I'm going to ask. Hang on. David Delati, do you have another question?
No, I'm good. Sorry.
No problem. I will unraise your hand. All right. I think we're at the end of Q&A. I don't have any more open ones, and I don't have any more hands up. So I'm going to end the meeting. Thank you all for participating. If you have more questions or you want to explore some concept, email me or call me. I'm happy. We do this because obviously it's what we do for a living, but on some level, helping people get through this is gratifying. And so doing things like this webinar just frankly just feel good, because I've heard from people that have taken what we've done here and have gone off and been able to do it themselves. So thank you, and let us know if we can help.